Let's get started with last night's State of the Union address. I have a couple of specific questions that I'm particularly curious about, but let's start with your overall reaction, the thing you most want people at home, the thought you'd most want them to hear about what you heard last night.
I heard President Biden talk a lot about government control of the economy, whether it was price caps or mandates, and I didn't hear a vision to reduce spending. And right now, as we approach $32 trillion in debt, Republicans in Congress want to see where we might be able to agree on spending cuts, some control of a budget that is ballooning out of control. And instead, we sort of heard a very muscular vision of the role that the federal government ought to have in the economy, not necessarily any humility on the part of the federal government to peel back, to reduce some of the cost drivers that we create, to reduce some of the inflation drivers when government spending is so egregious. And that was disappointing. Certainly, I enjoyed the parts about our veterans and the successes there. The burn pit legislation is something I strongly supported. It impacts Northwest Floridians. And so while we were able to agree on veteran policy, I don't know that we were able to agree much on economic policy.
And let's drill down that in a couple of ways. First of all, not only a deficit pushing $32 trillion, but a nightmarish debt to GDP ratio, the highest in history. And we hear the Democrats to some extent, perhaps maybe instead of spending cuts, maybe we could just peg it to debt to GDP. Could you talk just a little bit more about the potential concerns from your perspective if some spending cuts are not enacted?
Well, what should concern a lot of Northwest Floridians is very soon our debt service will eclipse the budget of the Pentagon. And that is totally unsustainable. It risks the dollar losing its place as the global reserve currency. And that's just the debt we've accumulated now. If we look 10, 20, 30 years in the future, we have programs that are going to balloon that spending. And so I think it's more responsible to act now. I found it very interesting that while Republicans and Democrats agree that Social Security and Medicare are unlikely to be changed as a result of debt limit negotiations, Medicaid was not held as a sacred cow in the same context. And so maybe there's reform we can do with overutilization of the Medicaid program. I'm a strong believer in work requirements for able-bodied working-age adults to be able to make a contribution to our community, contribute to economic growth, and then reduce the burden on government on the front end.
And let's talk about that, because that was of specific concern, this statement about a group of Republicans wanting to sunset Social Security and Medicare. Where'd that come from? If everybody agrees that Social Security is untouchable, where did that come from?
I think that came from Washington speechwriters at the White House, not any serious policy proposal. You saw a bipartisan standing ovation when the president said we're not going to be messing around with Social Security or Medicare in the context of these debt limit negotiations. But Medicaid is really the third leg of that stool. It's the third major driver of a lot of the upcoming liabilities that the country has to be able to meet. And so if we're able to preserve Medicaid for those who are truly disabled, for seniors, for people who are truly impoverished and trying to get out of poverty and into the middle class of our country, then I think it can be a successful program. Right now, Medicaid has serviced far too many people who could go to work but just choose not to, and then expect the rest of us to pay for their health care. So I don't think anyone should be nervous about Social Security or Medicare. I do believe there's a lot of reform we could do in the Medicaid program. It's ripe for the picking.
Very well. Another huge driver of inflation, obviously the price of oil, energy cost in general. Long-term crisis, yeah, it's out there. We're going to have to find solutions. But on the more immediate side, with the Ukraine war has certainly shown us we're not as energy dependent as we could be. Here in Northwest Florida, we love our beaches, and I know you prize our military mission, and you've taken a strong stand against drilling off the shores of Northwest Florida. Looking at current circumstances, however, looking at how easy it is for entities to raise the price, to de-dollarize, to turn off the tap, would you ever shift your position on offshore drilling just so the states could become more energy independent?
No, I would never support drilling off the coast of Florida because of the impact on our military mission. And cheap gas won't mean much if we're all speaking Mandarin, because the Chinese hold the higher ground. And off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, we test some of the critical component parts for hypersonic and supersonic weapon systems critical to deterring a China threat. But there are plenty of places in the country where the communities want to drill. It's a lot of the states that have right angles, not all the shoreline that Florida has. In the Dakotas, in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, there's a real desire to enhance the energy sector. Joe Biden has declared war on the energy sector. It was really weird last night when he said that oil and gas would only be in our future for 10 additional years. That was a laugh line. I don't know that President Biden intended for it to be a laugh line, but this is a driver of inflation. It's not the most significant driver of inflation. That would be all the government spending. When we pay people not to work and when we flood the economy with cash and there are supply chain issues caused by the Biden economy, you don't have enough goods, you have too much cash, and thus prices rise and the middle class gets squeezed, whether it's at the grocery store or filling up the gas tank on the way to work. And so we're for policies that will reduce those inflationary pressures, exploring our energy opportunities in the heartland of the country while at the same time reducing government spending. And I don't think we should be spending all this money in Ukraine. Right now, 49% of the country is all that supports sending additional funds to Ukraine. That's way down, now less than half the country. And so I think that we should take care of our own needs for our fellow Americans before sending another $100 billion to Ukraine.
Thank you for answering that one. I can cross it off my list. I was curious on your thoughts. But let's move to the potential of speaking Mandarin or not. I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts on the, whatever we're calling it, the weather balloon, the spy balloon, and the duration of time it was floating over our nation. You just launch wherever you want to, pardon the pun.
Yeah, it was a little weird to me how everyone had balloon mania, while at the same time 1 in 4 Americans has TikTok on their phone. And we know that TikTok is a Chinese Communist Party surveillance tool. I'm also concerned about drones that are made in China, that transmit information back to China, that are flown in our communities by even our local law enforcement. Sometimes even features of federal law enforcement are utilizing these DJI drones. So the balloon was bad. I believe it likely should have been taken out over the Pacific before it crossed into the heartland of our country over sensitive military installations. But the Chinese surveillance problem is so much more serious than one balloon, and I think we have to look at it holistically, not just when something captures our attention 60,000 feet above the earth.
I mean, this is probably rhetorical, but if you have any kind of answer, any kind of thought, why in the heck is anybody in this country still loading TikTok on their phone? Like, how can we know what we know and we're still looking at the dancing videos? How is this going on?
I totally agree with you. As long as TikTok is reporting data back to ByteDance, which is their Chinese Communist Party controlled entity that owns TikTok, it's a real threat. I don't have TikTok. I don't allow my staff to use TikTok on the phones we issue. I don't allow my own son to have a TikTok account because I'm worried that it allows surveillance. And if we were really serious about combating the China threat, I think we would look at all the ways they've infiltrated. I mean, think about Huawei. Think about how much telecom in rural America is being fused together by Chinese Communist Party hardware. So I strongly oppose the embrace of the Chinese technology that we've allowed in this country. I supported a ban on TikTok. I think governors like Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas, who have really gone after TikTok, are leading the way, and we could learn a lot from that in Washington for sure.
All right, I'm going to return to last night's address briefly because this one just came in from the newsroom. I think it's a fair question. I had worded it differently in my mind. It seems for several administrations, the general air of statesmanship, perhaps, has been on the decline. Last night we had hecklers like at an NBA game. We had Romney confronting Santos and, sideshow after sideshow. Do you think it's time Congress adopted any type of rules to, I don't know, I hate to say regulate more, but regulate some kind of decorum in the chambers?
Well, the House of Representatives is raucous. If you think it's too raucous, I would encourage our fellow Americans to go watch Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons in the UK, because you do see the type of back and forth and cheering and jeering and booing. That's not how I comport myself during the State of the Union. I think that it's an important moment for our country to be respectful and listen. And of course, we can react and applaud and stand and sit and that sends various messages out to the country. But I'm not one who thinks we make our best points when we break the decorum of the House. I will say I brought one of Northwest Florida's bravest, a retired Green Beret who was injured in Afghanistan, Sergeant First Class Martin Acosta. And that was his observation when the State of the Union had concluded. He said, I wish that the House didn't look so much like a frat house. I wish people comported themselves with a bit more humility and a bit more observance of decorum. And so it was interesting to me that one of our Northwest Florida veterans had that very observation that was the root of your question.
Very interesting. I generally leave interviews with anything I haven't asked you, any thoughts, but before I ask you to just go if I've left anything out, I got to ask you, you mentioned Governor Sanders. High profile governors brings to mind another governor, that of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Just asking for a friend, were there a potential Trump-DeSantis run for the Republican nomination, where would Matt Gaetz put his allegiance?
Well, I'm supporting President Trump, and I am a friend and a fan of Governor DeSantis. And maybe it's the selfish part of me, but I kind of want him to stay our governor for his full 8 years. Florida has flourished under the leadership of Governor DeSantis. I think he's done a great job, and I think he will be president one day, but I kind of want to get the full 8 years of Ron DeSantis as the governor of Florida before we share him with the rest of the country. I hope that doesn't come across as too selfish.
I think a lot of people in Northwest Florida would agree with you. I hear them say that. Last thing, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you really wanted people here in Northwest Florida to know today?
Well, in Northwest Florida, we're working really hard to enhance our military mission. And one thing I'll give President Biden some credit on, he has not attacked funding of our military the way we saw President Obama attack the funding of our military. And so as all of us look for areas where we can agree in divided government, I certainly think that continuing to enhance the technology and the basing resources in our community and throughout the country will inure to our country's great benefit, and I look forward to working with anyone and everyone to get that done.
All right, Representative Matt Gaetz, thank you so much for your time this morning and your answers. Look forward to talking to you again, maybe getting even wonkier on the economy if anybody would possibly listen, but you have a great day and thank you.
You as well. Thanks so much.